Cruising is changing and most passengers have no idea it's already happening. Not the obvious stuff. Not the things cruise lines announce in big emails. These are quiet changes. The kind you only notice when something suddenly costs more, takes longer, or doesn't work the way it used to. Some of these are making embarkation smoother. Some are changing who cruises are even designed for anymore. And some are already affecting where ships can go and how you're expected to get there. If you've cruised before or you're planning one soon, a few of these might genuinely surprise you, especially one that's quietly changing how cruise lines handle flights, and another that could reshape entire European itineraries. Here are 10 cruise secrets that are already changing how cruisers travel, whether passengers realize it or not. Number 1. Carnival Cruise Muster Drill Update. If you've cruised before, you probably remember that moment on embarkation day. You're excited. You've finally stepped on the ship. You can smell food somewhere. Your room might even be ready. And then, boom! You're herded into a crowded space, standing shoulder to shoulder, holding a life jacket like you're about to rehearse for a maritime disaster movie. That's the old way. And honestly, it was always a vibe killer. What Carnival Cruise Line has quietly changed is how that entire experience works. Instead of forcing thousands of passengers to stop what they're doing and attend one big group muster drill at the same time, many sailings now use a self-muster system. That means once you board, you complete your safety briefing on your own schedule. In practice, this is what it looks like. You get on the ship, you grab lunch, you explore. You maybe unpack a little. And at some point, before sail away, you watch a short safety video in the app or on your cabin TV. Then quickly check in at your assigned muster station. No whistles, no yelling, no standing there wondering why everyone suddenly looks annoyed even though they're on vacation. And yes, you still have to do it, but now it feels like a quick task instead of a punishment. This is a great change for a few reasons. First, embarkation flows better. When thousands of people aren't all forced into one place at the same time, lines move faster, elevators aren't jammed, and the ship just feels calmer. That first impression matters more than cruise lines like to admit. Second, passengers are actually paying attention. It turns out people absorb safety info better when they're not hot, tired, hungry, and annoyed. Who knew? Third, and this is the real secret, it makes the cruise feel premium, even on mainstream ships. You're being trusted to handle something like an adult, instead of being treated like you might wander off if someone isn't watching you. From Carnival's side, it's a win too. Fewer staff tied up managing giant crowds, fewer complaints, less embarkation stress, and happier guests spending money sooner instead of grumbling about that stupid drill. Most passengers don't even realize this was a policy change. They just think, oh wow, boarding was way smoother this time. And that's exactly the point. Because once cruise lines figured out they could make one part of the experience easier without sacrificing safety, it opened the door to changing a lot of other things too. Some of those changes are great, and some of them, later in this list, come with strings attached. Number 2. Norwegian Cruise Line dining policy updates. Food is one of the biggest reasons people cruise in the first place. Unlimited options. Multiple restaurants. Menus you don't have to cook, clean up, or argue about. So when dining rules change, even slightly, it matters more than cruise lines like to admit. What's been happening on Norwegian Cruise Line isn't one big headline-grabbing announcement. It's a series of quiet, behind-the-scenes dining changes that most passengers don't notice until they're already on board. And that's exactly why this one counts as a cruise secret. Here's what it looks like from the passenger side. You might notice menus feel a little tighter than you remember. Fewer order 5 mains just because you can moments. Specialty restaurants suddenly caring a lot more about no-shows and reservation times. Room service feeling more structured, sometimes with small fees or limits depending on what you order. None of this is shouted from the rooftops. There's no big email saying, hey, we're changing how food works. Instead, it just feels different. The reason behind it is actually pretty simple. Waste and logistics. Cruise ships were throwing away massive amounts of food. We're talking staggering levels, especially in main dining rooms where people would order extra dishes just to try them, take 2 bites, and move on. From the cruise line's perspective, that means higher food costs, more supply chain pressure, more waste to store, process, and offload. So the solution wasn't to take food away, and that would cause outrage, but to gently steer behavior. Subtle menu changes, more structure around reservations, a little more accountability if you book a specialty restaurant and don't show up. And here's the slightly funny part. Most passengers don't even realize it's happening. They just think, the menu feels a bit more organized, which is exactly what the cruise line wants. For a lot of people, this actually improves the experience. Food comes out faster. Dining rooms feel less chaotic. Reservations are easier to manage because fewer tables are sitting empty, waiting on no-shows. But for seasoned cruisers who remember the Wild West days of cruising, when you could order half the menu just because it was included, this is a noticeable shift. It's not about being cheap. It's about control. And once cruise lines realized they could quietly change dining behavior without passengers pushing back, it showed them something important. If you adjust the experience slowly enough, people don't complain. They adapt. That same mindset shows up again later in this list, and not all of those changes are as harmless as menu tweaks. Number 3. Lines are enforcing behavior and accessibility rules more strictly. This one always surprises people because, technically, these rules aren't new. What's new is how seriously cruise lines are enforcing them. For a long time, a lot of onboard rules lived in a gray area. They existed in the fine print, but enforcement was inconsistent. Sometimes staff would step in, sometimes they wouldn't. It depended on the ship, the crew, and how much trouble someone was causing. That's changing. Across multiple lines, behavior and accessibility policies are being applied far more consistently, and passengers are noticing. What does that look like in real life? Unescorted kids actually being told to leave adult-only areas after curfew. Groups being warned or removed for disruptive behavior instead of getting endless chances. Mobility scooters being checked for size, weight, and charging safety instead of "we'll deal with it later." None of this is dramatic when you read it in a rulebook. But on board, it feels very different. For most passengers, this is actually a huge improvement. Dining rooms are calmer, shows aren't constantly interrupted, lounges feel more relaxed instead of chaotic. And for families following the rules already, it means fewer situations where someone else's bad behavior ruins the night. But there's another side to it. Because stricter enforcement also means less flexibility. If your mobility device doesn't meet size limits, it's no longer a "we'll see what we can do" conversation. If teens ignore curfews, staff step in quickly. If someone's had one too many drinks and starts pushing boundaries, consequences come faster. Cruise lines aren't doing this to be mean. They're doing it because ships are sailing full again, sometimes over capacity, and chaos doesn't scale well. When you put thousands of people in a floating city, you either enforce rules or the experience deteriorates for everyone. The slightly funny part is how this catches some passengers off guard. You'll hear things like, "they never used to care about this. We've always done it this way." And the crew's response now is basically, "yes, and that's why we're stopping it." This shift is important because it shows a bigger pattern. Cruise lines are choosing consistency over leniency. And once they commit to that mindset, it doesn't just apply to behavior. It starts showing up in who cruises are designed for and who they quietly stop catering to. Which brings us to the next change. Number 4. Some cruise lines are quietly shifting to adults-only sailings. This is where things start to get opinionated. Because cruising has always tried to be everything to everyone. Family-friendly, romantic, relaxing, party-focused, quiet, lively, all at once. And that balancing act? It's getting harder. What some cruise lines are doing now, without making a huge fuss about it, is leaning into adults-only cruising. Not as a one-off theme sailing, not as a special week, but as a core identity. A good example is Oceania Cruises. Their ships have always felt adult-focused, fine dining, enrichment talks, slower pace. But now it's official. They've moved to 18-plus sailings, meaning no kids on board at all. And this isn't about being anti-family, it's about clarity. Because here's the uncomfortable truth cruise lines have learned. Trying to please everyone usually ends up pleasing no one. Adults who book a premium cruise don't want kids running through quiet lounges at night. Families don't want to feel judged for having kids. And crew members don't want to referee tension that never needed to exist in the first place. Adults-only cruising removes all of that instantly. No curfews to argue about. No family pool versus quiet pool drama. No awkward moments where someone's annoyed but pretending they're not. It also changes the entire onboard atmosphere. Dinner stretches longer. Evenings feel calmer. Shows are tailored to adults instead of trying to stay PG at all times. For a lot of cruisers, that sounds like heaven. For others, especially families, it feels like cruising is slowly closing doors. And that's why this change matters. It's not that cruising is becoming adults only across the board. It's that cruise lines are segmenting their audiences more aggressively. Some ships are clearly designed for families. Some are clearly designed for adults who want quiet, structure, and zero cannonball splashes near their deck chair. The slightly funny part is how people react when they don't read the fine print. You'll see comments like, "why is this cruise so boring?" Or, "why are there no kids' activities?" And the answer is simple. Because this cruise isn't for kids. This shift tells us something important about where cruising is headed. Cruise lines are no longer trying to make every ship fit every traveler. They're picking sides. And once you notice that, you start seeing the same strategy show up in other areas too. From rules to pricing to who cruise lines quietly design their policies around. Which leads perfectly into the next change. Number 5. Mexico bans vaping devices for tourists. This one catches a lot of cruisers off guard because it doesn't feel like something you'd ever need to think about. You're not bringing anything illegal. You're not trying to sell anything. You're just packing what you normally use, and then suddenly, it's a problem. Mexico has been actively enforcing a ban on vaping devices, including e-cigarettes and vapes. And yes, that applies to tourists and cruise passengers. What makes this rule especially sneaky is that it's not always enforced the same way every single time. Some people walk through without issue. Others have their devices confiscated on the spot. And there are cruisers who don't even realize it's happened until they're told very matter-of-factly that they won't be getting it back. No warning, no refund, no, we'll hold it for you. It's just gone. For cruise passengers, this matters because Mexican ports are everywhere in Caribbean and West Coast itineraries. Cozumel, Costa Maya, Ensenada. These are staple cruise stops, and a lot of people step off the ship without thinking twice about what's in their pocket or bag. And that's where the trouble starts. Unlike alcohol limits or obvious prohibited items, vaping sits in this weird mental category of normal personal item. So people assume it's fine until it isn't. The slightly wild part is that enforcement can happen at different points. Sometimes at port security, sometimes during customs screening, sometimes not at all, which only makes the rule feel more confusing. But make no mistake, the rule itself is real. Cruise lines have started quietly warning passengers in pre-cruise documents and onboard announcements, usually buried among a dozen other port reminders. And if you miss that one line, you learn the hard way. For non-vapers, this sounds like a non-issue. For people who vape regularly, it can turn into a very long shore day. This change is important because it highlights something bigger. Cruise rules don't stop at the ship. What's allowed on board doesn't automatically mean it's allowed in port. And as destinations tighten laws, especially around health, environment, and tourism, cruise passengers are increasingly expected to know local regulations themselves. No one's announcing this at Sail Away, but it's already changing how people cruise. And coming up next is a change that doesn't just affect what you bring ashore. It affects how you even get to the ship in the first place. Number 6. Big air travel rule change with Norwegian Cruise Line. This is one of those changes that sounds small on paper, but hits very differently once you realize what it actually means. If you book your flights through Norwegian Cruise Line's air program, you can no longer fly into the port city on the same day your cruise departs. You now have to arrive at least one day early. That means an extra hotel night, extra transfers, extra planning, and yes, extra money. For a lot of cruisers, this feels like the rules changing mid-game. For years, one of the big selling points of cruise line air programs was convenience. You book the cruise, you tick the box for flights, and everything lines up neatly. Fly in, get on the ship. Done. Now, not so much. From the passenger side, this can feel annoying, even unnecessary. People think, I've flown in same day before and it was fine. And sometimes, it was. But cruise lines learned this lesson the hard way. Flight delays, cancellations, missed connections, entire groups of passengers missing Sail Away and needing expensive rescue logistics to catch the ship at the next port. Every time that happens, it costs the cruise line money, time, and customer goodwill, even when the delay wasn't technically their fault. So instead of dealing with that chaos, Norwegian has essentially said, we're not risking it anymore. From their perspective, this rule makes perfect sense. Arriving a day early dramatically reduces missed embarkations. It protects the schedule. It protects the ship. And it protects them from angry passengers demanding compensation because a flight they didn't control went wrong. But for cruisers, this change quietly shifts responsibility. You're now expected to build buffer time into your trip whether you like it or not, at least if you're using the cruise line's air program. Some people actually love this. They get a relaxed arrival. They explore the port city. They board the ship feeling rested instead of stressed and sweaty from sprinting through an airport. Others, not so much. For budget-conscious travelers, that extra hotel night can feel like a hidden cost that wasn't part of the original cruise math. And for people cruising out of expensive ports, that one night can add up fast. What makes this a real cruise secret is that it's not being framed as a rule change. It's being framed as for your convenience and protection, which it is, but it also changes how cruising works. This signals something bigger. Cruise lines are becoming less willing to absorb travel risk on behalf of passengers. They're drawing clearer lines around what they will and won't be responsible for. And if airlines keep getting more unpredictable, don't be surprised if other lines follow this exact same path. Because once one major cruise line proves this reduces chaos, it's very hard for the rest to ignore it. Number 7, visa and entry requirements tightening. This is one of those changes that doesn't feel like a cruise issue, until you realize it absolutely is. Europe is rolling out new border systems designed to track who enters and exits the region, and cruise passengers are included in that. Two names keep coming up: EES and ETIAS. Here's the part most cruisers don't expect. Even if your cruise only stops in Europe for the day, even if you never stay overnight, you're still entering Europe, and that means these systems apply to you. The entry/exit system, EES, will digitally log your arrival and departure instead of relying on old passport stamps. That sounds simple, but in practice, it can mean longer processing times, more checks, and tighter enforcement at ports, especially at the start. Then there's ETIAS, which is essentially a travel authorization for visa-exempt travelers. Think of it like a pre-approval step you're expected to do before you travel. The slightly stressful part, this isn't handled by the cruise line. Cruise lines can remind you, they can warn you, but they're not responsible for making sure you've done it correctly. If you turn up without the right authorization, the ship doesn't wait while you sort it out. For years, cruising in Europe felt effortless. Show your passport, walk off the ship, wander around, back on board by dinner. These new systems add a layer of administration that simply didn't exist before. And for frequent cruisers, that's a real shift. Most passengers won't notice it once everything's settled. But during rollout periods, that's when confusion happens. Longer lines at ports, people being pulled aside, last minute, why didn't anyone tell us moments. The important thing to understand is this: cruising doesn't bypass immigration rules anymore. Ships are floating hotels, not legal loopholes. This change matters because it shows how cruising is becoming more closely tied to global border systems, not just port agreements and ship schedule. And while this one feels bureaucratic rather than dramatic, the consequences of missing it can be very real. Because unlike a missed show reservation or a dining mix-up, this is the kind of mistake that can keep you from getting off the ship at all. And coming up next is a change that almost added a brand new cost to cruising and could still come back when people least expect it. Number 8. Hawaii's cruise climate tax was blocked, but only for now. This one is a perfect example of how cruising is changing behind the scenes. Even when passengers never see a charge added to their bill, Hawaii seriously considered adding a new climate and tourism tax aimed at cruise passengers, a fee tied to environmental impact and over-tourism. The proposed idea was that if a cruise ship docks in Hawaii, passengers would effectively pay an additional charge while the ship is in port, and it wasn't a tiny amount either. Depending on how it was applied, the cost could have added up to a noticeable percentage of your cruise fare, without changing a single thing about your trip. Here's the part most people don't realize. This wasn't just talk. It made it far enough through the process that cruise lines pushed back legally, and a federal court blocked it from taking effect, at least for now. So passengers didn't see the charge. Cruises kept operating as usual, and most people never even knew it almost happened. But that's exactly why this matters. Because this wasn't about Hawaii being anti-cruise. It was about destinations asking a bigger question. Should cruise passengers contribute more to the places they visit? Hawaii has long struggled with over-tourism, environmental strain, and infrastructure pressure, especially from large ships bringing thousands of visitors at once. This proposed tax was part of a wider effort to shift how tourism is funded and managed. The block doesn't mean the idea is gone, it means it's paused. Cruise lines won this round, but the conversation didn't stop. And once one destination seriously explores a passenger-based tax, others start watching closely. This is why seasoned cruisers should pay attention to things like this, even when they don't affect today's booking, because these policies rarely appear out of nowhere. They show up first as almost rules, then pilot programs, then suddenly line items on your invoice. It also explains why cruise lines are becoming more vocal about defending their pricing structures, not just against fuel costs or staffing, but against portside charges they don't control. The slightly ironic part, passengers would likely blame the cruise line for the extra cost, even if it came from the destination. So for now, cruising in Hawaii looks the same as it always has. But this moment was a warning sign. It showed how close cruising is to entering a future where destination-based fees become normal, not rare. And once that door opens, it rarely closes completely. Next up is a change that's already reshaping where ships can go, and what kinds of cruises may even exist in the future. Number 9. Environmental and port policy shifts in Europe. This is where cruising starts to feel bigger than just ships and passengers. Because what's happening in parts of Europe right now isn't a single rule change, it's a shift in attitude. And once you notice it, you can't unsee it. In places like Norway, environmental protections are no longer just talk. New regulations are already being enforced in and around sensitive areas, especially the famous fjords. The long-term direction is clear. Fewer ships, cleaner ships, and eventually no traditional fuel-powered ships in certain World Heritage areas. That doesn't mean Norway is banning cruises tomorrow, but it does mean itineraries are already being adjusted, ship sizes are being reconsidered, and access is becoming more controlled. And here's the important part for passengers. These changes don't always show up as this port is banned. They show up as shorter port times, fewer ships allowed per day, itinerary swaps at the last minute, ports being replaced with alternatives that sound similar but aren't the same experience. Then there's Amsterdam. Amsterdam has been very open about wanting to reduce over-tourism, and cruise ships are firmly part of that conversation. City officials have discussed limiting and eventually eliminating large ocean cruise calls in favor of smaller, cleaner alternatives. Again, this isn't an overnight ban, it's a slow squeeze. Fewer docking permissions, more restrictions, more pressure on cruise lines to justify why they're there. From the passenger side, this can feel confusing. You book a cruise because the itinerary looks amazing. Then months later, ports change, or times are cut, or the ship docks farther away than expected. Nothing is technically wrong, but the experience isn't quite what you imagined. What makes this shift important is that it's not isolated. Once one high-profile destination starts tightening access, others take notes. Mediterranean cities, historic ports, small coastal towns that simply don't want 10,000 people arriving at once anymore. Cruising is no longer being welcomed everywhere just because it brings tourists. It's being evaluated. And cruise lines know this, which is why you're seeing more investment in newer ships, alternative ports, and repositioned itineraries that avoid the most sensitive areas. The slightly unsettling truth is this: the map of cruising in Europe is being quietly redrawn. Not with announcements, not with headlines, but with policy meetings, environmental targets, and port approvals that happen long before passengers ever hear about them. This change matters because it affects the future of cruising, not just your next booking. And it sets the stage for the final shift on this list, one that looks exciting on the surface, but changes cruising in ways most people don't expect. Number 10. New cruise ships are launching, and they're quietly changing everything. This one sounds like good news, and in a lot of ways, it is. New cruise ships mean bigger attractions, newer tech, more dining options, and jaw-dropping features designed to make the ship itself the destination. Slides get taller, shows get flashier, cabins get smarter. But here's the part most people don't think about. Every time a new megaship launches, it doesn't just add capacity, it reshapes the entire cruise ecosystem. Ships like Star of the Seas from Royal Caribbean, MSC World America from MSC Cruises, Disney Adventure from Disney Cruise Line, and new Prima Class expansions from Norwegian Cruise Line aren't just filling new itineraries. They're pushing older ships, smaller ships, and entire routes into different roles. And that has ripple effects. Ports have to adapt to handle larger ships. Popular itineraries get crowded because the biggest ships need the biggest, best-equipped ports. Smaller ports get dropped or replaced because they can't support the new giant. For passengers, this creates a strange split. On one hand, cruising feels more exciting than ever. On the other, ships are sailing fuller, ports are busier, and experiences that used to feel relaxed now feel dense. It also affects pricing in sneaky ways. New ships command higher fares. Older ships get discounted, but often with more limits, fewer inclusions, or shorter port times. Cruise lines steer passengers toward the ships they want, filled first. And then there's crowd behavior. When ships are designed as floating theme parks, more passengers stay on board in port. That changes shore excursions, local economies, and even how ports manage crowds, because not everyone gets off anymore. The irony is that new ships are often marketed as the future of cruising, and they are. But they also accelerate every other change you've heard in this list. Stricter rules, tighter schedules, more segmentation between premium, family, and mass market cruises. So while new ships look shiny and exciting in commercials, they quietly push cruising into a new phase. One that's more controlled, more structured, and less spontaneous than it used to be. And that's why this belongs at the end of the list. Because when you step back and look at all 10 changes together, a pattern becomes clear. Cruising isn't getting worse, but it is getting different. And the passengers who understand that early, them are the ones who adapt and enjoy it the most.